President Trump officially declares the radical leftist group Antifa a terrorist organization as riots are red-pilling Americans like never before. In this video, we're going to take a look at what's really nothing short of Trump's declaration of war on Antifa, and we're going to see a number of studies that show that riots and threats of terrorism turn populations to the political right like nothing else, which promises a left-wing bloodbath in November. You're not going to want to miss this. Greetings, everyone. Dr. Steve here with you. I certainly hope you're all having a wonderful start to your week. If this is your first time here at this channel, we post 2 videos a day, analyze the current events, analyze some super awesome conservative trends so that you can live in the present in light of even better things to come. So if you haven't already done so, you know what to do. Make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. You're going to absolutely love interacting with this online community of conservatives from all over the world. They're simply the best. So let's begin with our video chat question of the day. Do you support President Trump's designation of Antifa as a terrorist organization? Let us know in the comments section below. Do you support President Trump's decision to designate Antifa as a terrorist organization? Because, you know, we're going to find that such a designation has profound political ramifications that radically favor the nationalist populist right. I think you absolutely love this. But first, if the coronavirus situation has turned your financial life upside down and you need help to sort out your choices to get you back on track, you should talk to our good friends over at Noble Gold. With the stock market returning minus 10% since the start of the year, you know, you might be surprised, pleasantly so, that gold has actually gained ground by around 15%. So that's 25% more bang for your buck with gold. The team over at Noble Gold has helped hundreds of families through this crisis, and they can guide you back to safety and give you ideas of how to get there. Now remember, when you need a financial friend, Noble Gold will always be there for you. So give them a call at 877-646-5347. That's 877-646-5347. Or you could hit the link down below and get their free investor's guide. Tell them Dr. Steve sent you. You'll be glad that you did. All right, gang, let's dive right in here. President Trump has announced on Sunday that the United States government has in fact officially designated the radical left group Antifa as a terrorist organization. Now, this comes on the heels of President Trump blaming Antifa for the outbreak of riots that have taken place in cities across our nation in response to the death of George Floyd, who was the unarmed black man killed on May 25th by a white police officer in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The event was caught on video, and it sparked outrage among blacks throughout the nation, which in turn has led to this outbreak of riots. President Trump tweeted out just after noon yesterday in no uncertain terms, no qualifications, the United States of America will be designating Antifa as a terrorist organization. Now, this declaration is a follow-up from a resolution that was introduced in the Senate by Ted Cruz last year, which stated that Antifa represents opposition to the democratic ideals of peaceful assembly and free speech for all, and would have officially designated Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization. Now, President Trump is actively fulfilling that resolution. Shortly after Trump's declaration, Attorney General Bill Barr issued a statement confirming that the Justice Department will be prosecuting Antifa members as domestic terrorists. And again, this comes on the heels of Attorney General Barr saying on Saturday that the violence that's been sweeping across cities does in fact appear to have been planned and carried out by far left extremist groups like Antifa, using Antifa-like tactics. Now, of course, this is going to involve the government implementing measures like surveillance of Antifa as well as prosecutorial consequences. Members of Antifa will be punished far more harshly, severely as domestic terrorists, as well as at least potentially those who support them, which turns out to be, interestingly enough, a number of kids of Democratic politicians. I think it was Jeremiah Ellison, the son of Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, who declared his support of Antifa just after President Trump declared them a terrorist organization, which is a pretty dumb move on his part, but I don't expect much more. Remember, his father is now in charge of the prosecution of the police officers involved in the death of George Floyd, which should be interesting to say the least. Now, to make matters even worse for the far leftist cultural Marxist crowd, who are the primary instigators and perpetrators of these riots, A new study has just come out that shows that these riots are having the effect of red-pilling Americans. The New Yorker is reporting on a study conducted by a professor of politics over at Princeton University, who just published a paper where he found that riots result in a clear trend among voters to turn to the political right as a response to the violence. He examined riots, particularly race-related riots, starting in the 1960s, where there were two overlapping waves of protests. So nonviolent civil rights demonstrations on the one hand, and violent urban rioting on the other, which in turn combined to help give Richard Nixon the presidential victory in 1968. On a county-by-county basis, the Princeton professor found that black-led violent riots saw a significant decline in Democratic vote share in the 1964, 68, and 1972 presidential elections. In fact, in 72, Nixon won 49 states, losing only Massachusetts. That was Nixon's re-election. This study concludes that the physical damage inflicted upon poor urban neighborhoods by rioting does not result in more liberal or progressive policies in response, but rather the violence only compounds the damage by instigating a massive, what the professor calls a regressive backlash. Now, the Princeton professor is clearly left-wing liberal with choice expressions like that. So I think it's important to note that this isn't right-wing wishful thinking in terms of red-pilling America. These are left-wing liberals, both the professor and the New Yorker magazine, admitting that the violent riots of the 1960s did in fact usher in a Nixonian law and order backlash that drove a wave of anti-rioter legislation that lasted for decades. Politicians like Bill Clinton had to endorse criminal justice penalties that were considered radically harsh, but necessary for him to get reelected. Now, this Princeton study corroborates earlier studies that found that there is a clear connection between the perpetration of terrorist acts and an observable increase for support for the political right. Scholars have studied the Israeli electorate in particular and found that elections held within a few months of a terrorist attack caused a noticeable increase of support for the political right. And the important point here is that this right-wing turn happened. Get this movement towards the right happened even within traditionally left-leaning localities. Other studies have found that repeated exposure to rocket threats, right, in this case, just the very real threat of terrorism, not its perpetration, but just its threat, that was enough to shift Israeli voter support to right-wing nationalists consistently throughout elections that took place from the year 2000 to all the way to 2010 during a 10-year period. And there's little question that terrorism has been a major component in solidifying the resurgent nationalism and re-traditionalism currently going on in Israel over the last decade. You may not know it, but Israel really is one of the single most nationalistic countries on the planet, and its conservative party, Likud, they've been in power for now quite some time. And what's so interesting here in terms of the study of the Israeli political situation in particular is that over the course of the last 2 decades of terrorist threats, Israel has formed what some scholars believe to be the single most solid and stable nationalist populist right-wing government in the world. And while that's widely recognized, what far fewer have recognized is that the threat of terrorism has been perhaps the single greatest contribution to such a nationalist right-wing formation. Scholars, too, have noticed a comparable turn towards nationalist parties in Turkey in response to attacks by Kurdish PKK militants. And this threat of terrorism may be a major factor in Turkey's current embracing of conservative Islamic social norms under Erdogan. So what's important for us to get here is how Trump's designation of Antifa as a terrorist organization on the one hand, and the riots and the violence that have broken out across the country on the other, these two things are combining to frankly red pill America like never before. If these studies are accurate, and I have no reason to believe that they're not, if these studies are indeed accurate, we are currently witnessing perhaps the single most red-pilling events we've seen in our lifetimes. A combination of violent riots and domestic terrorist activity have the potential red-pilling the nation like never before. And again, It's leftists that are admitting this. All right. That's why I think civil rights attorney Leo Turley, who was on Sean Hannity's program the other night, I think he's absolutely right that the Democrats will suffer horrifically at the polls in November for defending these riots. These rioters are violent criminals, and if the Democrats come across as actually defending and even championing these criminals like Keith Ellison's son did in his tweet, or Joe Biden's staff who've donated to a group that posts bail for those arrested at these riots. If that's the way the Democrats are being perceived, then they risk a bloodbath in November, perhaps like we have never seen. Now, before you go, you will definitely want to check out my video I just posted on the CNN building getting attacked by rioters in Atlanta. Who would have ever thought it would come to this? But it did, and you have to see it to believe it. So make sure to click on the link, and I will see you over there. God bless.